So, a couple months ago, one of my friends brought up this idea of systemic racism and how modern discourse tends to believe that any disparity when it comes to equality of outcome must be the result of some inherent, intangible, structural barrier. His definition of systemic racism required that there be some specific policy that directly discriminates against a particular race or group of races, such as the Jim Crow laws in America, the Race Classification Act in South Africa, and other historical examples. On another occasion, another friend of mine asked me whether he should be supporting Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. Both statements sound pretty obvious, and saying something like all lives don't matter sounds pretty indefensible. And these people aren't the only ones confused by the language that we use for social activism. And it's not difficult to see why this language devolves in the way that it does. There is a need for a kind of populism. That is, activists need to have as many people as possible to rally behind their cause, and so you have slogans such as Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter, or people posting Black Instagram swears, and so on. The goal is to get a slogan that nobody can be against and everyone must be for. And I get it, because there is a need it's difficult to rally support, popular support behind a particular cause if you don't have something simple and easy for people to latch onto. But the problem with this kind of thinking is, one, it's reductive, and two, it facilitates performative activism. But I think most crucially, three, it's responsible for tokenism on government and corporate levels. What are the impacts of this? I think there are two major actors involved. The first are the individual activists. So myself and probably most of you, we become incredibly focused on issues of very little significance. Namely, how to gain social clout by having every pseudo-progressive slogan about everything on social media. It's brilliant because it's a distraction that we feel good about paying heed to, and it lowers our standards and it diverts our attention from the second actor. The second actor are the people who have the capacity to address these issues, namely governments and corporations. With the advent of reductionism, all a government has to do in order to address systemic racism, for example, is to idolize how a POC president came into power, or how a POC vice president came into power. Despite having the same wealthy background, elite education, social status, connections in the business community as their white counterparts. In other words, there is complete disaffection with the actual POC masses. And for corporations, it's even easier. All they have to do is have a message about anti-racism somewhere on the company website. And so, the problem with this is that as voters, we see this and we vote in our governments, thereby giving them political legitimation. And as consumers, we vote in our corporations by purchasing their products and services, thereby giving them economic legitimation. Now the problem with this is that there is very marginal and entirely tokenistic change on the parts of both of these actors, because they don't have to do anything more. They've already achieved their goal, namely to get in government, stay in government, or maximize profit. Now this is only one example of how imposing top-down narratives leads to the perpetuation of a pretty inequitable social status quo. The mechanics and function of the system have been analyzed much more thoroughly by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky in their book Manufacturing Consent, in which they analyze the role of the media in democratic societies. The crux of their argument comes from an institutional analysis of the media, where the media tends to be part of large corporations which are integrated into even larger conglomerates. And the way that the media make a profit is by providing a space for advertisers to advertise their goods and services to other corporations. Or in other words, the product here is not you. You are not the ones who are paying these corporations. It's other corporations that are trying to get advertising space. And so in order to increase advertising rates, if you talk to your friends in the advertising industry, the best way to do so is by trying to get audiences that are more elite and affluent. And so you have huge corporations selling relatively privileged audiences to other huge corporations in a relationship where these other corporations are the buyers, the mass media are the sellers, and the advertising to these privileged audiences is the product. Now, given no other assumptions, what kind of perspective of the world would you assume would come out of this system, if not for one that favors the perspectives and the privileges, the interests, and the conceptions of the buyers, the sellers, and the product? And so you have an institutional set of filters that restrict what can and cannot be said on issues that may infringe on the interests of these members of the same highly privileged elite. I think one of the clearest examples of how this leads to racism is going on right now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. European and North American governments are pretty much unequivocally accepting over 1 million Ukrainian refugees displaced by this crisis with open arms and temporary residency, while refugees from Syria or Yemen are instead receive barbed wire fences and rubber bullets. I think most European leaders claim to be religious Christians, so presumably they have read the Bible and found its numerous condemnations of hypocrisy. But anyone who isn't a hypocrite would immediately point out that this disparity in treatment is a form of racism. But in the mass media, the most you'll see is a side remark that this disparity in treatment is not on the basis of skin, not on the basis of the color of their skin, because that would be racism. It's on the basis of the color of the people's eyes and hair. And so, I think this is really depressing to think about all of this, because essentially what it concludes is that the only institutions that are able to have a meaningful impact on these issues is, well, these governments and corporations, and they're never going to do anything meaningful because that would violate the very tenets of their existence. And the propaganda model severely impairs our ability to demand change from these institutions. But I think it's only fair for us to subject our own privilege to the same scrutiny. Because when it comes to issues of human freedom, the most important question is always, what can we do? Not what can others do, what can we do? How can we use our attention and our effort to make the world a better place? And so as citizens of democratic societies, with access to the internet, with access to university education, with relatively well-protected freedom of expression, and with a level of affluence, I think we are capable of putting sizable pressure on these institutions in order to effect change. And perhaps with enough popular support and with enough of our effort, there will be a shift in power from unaccountable institutions and into the public domain. Going back to the Bible, or the Quran, or the Torah, or maybe the Veda, or maybe any other religious book, maybe Descartes if you're an atheist, you see that there tends to be a theme of God bestowing the faculty of reason as a gift to all of humankind. And Descartes was revolutionary in how he formalized the ideology of skepticism as a way to view the world. Well, I think in either case, we see that this tool that we have is perhaps our greatest defense against people who try to impose their power. This is the greatest defense against the necessary illusions constructed to protect those who abuse their power. Because for us, ignorance is not bliss. Knowledge is power. So let's use it to the best of our ability. Thank you.